Do you know who the serpent was in the Garden of Eden? Was it an actual snake, or was it some type of other creature that no longer exists? Or maybe it was something completely different. Stick around for a few minutes and see if you have this one figured out. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Thus Saith the Lloyd. I'm Gene Lloyd, and today I'm sharing a bit about the history of the name of Satan, which is not something we normally would discuss or dig into, but it is an interesting topic that's kind of fun to look at. In Genesis chapter 3, we have the account of the serpent tempting Adam and Eve, right? It's a well-known story. We all know this story, but it has a little bit of mystery intertwined that maybe you haven't thought about before. Okay, so before we get into that, do me a favor and subscribe, do all those things so that we can get this content into more people's homes, and I really appreciate your help with that. Okay, so, oftentimes when we think about the Garden of Eden, we usually refer to the serpent as Satan. We just kind of do that by default, but, it's not actually in the text. The word Satan is not actually in that text, and so you might even be surprised to find out that the Hebrew text throughout the Old Testament tells a little bit of a different story. Now, if we take the New Testament out of the equation, it's hard to definitively say that the serpent in the Garden of Eden is Satan. Okay, it's hard to say that. Now, if we fast forward to the end of the New Testament, if we go to Revelation 12:9, like that connects the dots for us. So we know definitively right there, okay, Satan and the serpent, same person, same being. We even have times where Jesus mentions Satan, right? But prior to those things, when we're strictly looking at the Old Testament, it's hard to make those same conclusions. Now, the word Satan appears in the Bible 27 times. But what you might be surprised to find out is that it's never used as a personal name or a personal noun. It's always used as a title. And really, the best translation for it is the accuser or adversary. And so that's how it's translated in some scriptures, and then in other scriptures it's translated as the name Satan. And I think somewhere along the way, the translators just started making it a personal name. We'll get into that in just a minute. In fact, if you follow the link below in my article that I've written on this, you can go a little deeper where I talk about those 27 verses, and I go into the Hebrew a little bit more in depth and give some more context. But at least for this short video piece, what I want you to think about, I'm going to take you back to your high school English class. I want you to think about English language or languages in general where we use these definite articles, right? So if you remember high school English, the definite article in English is the word the. Okay, in Hebrew, it's the word ha. And so ha and the, okay, that's what they equal to. So in the Hebrew, when we see the word Satan, 17 of these 27 times, it's rendered as ha-satan. That's how it's worded, which really means the Satan. That's how we would translate it, the Satan. But a lot of times when translators translate this, they just drop that definite article, okay? So if I'm saying the Satan, and it's a name, then that would be like me saying the Bob or the Susan, right? It doesn't work. That doesn't work in our language. It doesn't work in the Hebrew language. But a lot of the modern translators, maybe because they had the luxury of the New Testament, maybe because they knew they already connected the dots, so they went ahead and dropped that definite article in some of these places. But really, it's never used as a name in the Old Testament, okay? We know Jesus refers to Satan by name later. And we think that the change was probably made when the Hebrew language, when that word Satan was transliterated into Greek. That's probably the point where it became a name. But prior to that, it was never actually a name. So the entire history of the Old Testament, we really don't see the name Satan anywhere. It's just a title, okay? Now, the other interesting thing is that even though Satan wasn't a name in the Old Testament, and even though it's never used in the Garden of Eden account, we can still kind of connect it a little bit, okay? If we go to Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapter 14, where we get those little pieces of a story of the fall of Satan kind of intermixed in there, that helps us a little bit because it tells us about this being that got kicked out of heaven. Well, Jesus also in Luke 10:18 talks about Satan being tossed out of heaven, right? He says, I saw Satan fall like lightning, right? So those three sections of Scripture we can kind of link together to some degree and say, okay, this is probably the same character. And if we look at just Ezekiel and just Isaiah on those passages and we compare that to the Garden of Eden, we can say, well, this is probably the same dude because the descriptions match, right? It's likely that the serpent is the same person listed in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14. But it's still hard to make the connection to, say, the story in Job, where you have, Hasatan show up again, an adversary show up again and accuse Job. So those are hard to connect. Now, it's easy when we have the New Testament pulled in, we can do it. But without it, it's not. And so I just wanted to share that with you today because I wanted to help you have some perspective. There are topics sometimes we can approach these, and if we narrow our focus, like in this case, if we narrow our focus just to what an Israelite person would know in 1000 BC, the result is going to be a little different. And so I like to study Scripture sometimes very narrow, in a very narrow context like this, and then broaden it out. Now, of course, we should interpret the Old Testament through the New Testament because we've got a lot of good content in the New Testament that helps us understand the Old Testament better. And so we should definitely do that in these cases. But sometimes it's also fun to pause and say, okay, what would someone who lived in Old Testament times actually know about this topic? And what would they think about this topic? And so we see that, and then we see that change that takes place, and then Satan becomes a name later on. So think about that. I hope that's an interesting topic for you. I know it is for me. Go read the article if you'd like to get some more stuff on this. I hope you enjoyed this one. I enjoyed studying into it myself. So thus saith the Lord, the name Satan did not exist in the Old Testament. It showed up later. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Do me a favor and just leave some comments below and let me know what you think about this one. And if you've ever researched this one before and you came up with some of the conclusions, I'd love to see those as well. So please share those with me, and I'll see you next time.